Inspired by real-life events, Ethan Carter woke up to a phone call that instantly shattered everything he thought was stable, because on the other side of the line a voice said, "Your account has been frozen due to fraud investigation." And in that single sentence, his entire world of financial stability, future plans, and self-belief collapsed at 6:14 a.m. in a small rented apartment in Chicago, where the rain was hitting the window like it already knew his life was about to change. And for a few seconds, he just sat there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process how a senior software analyst earning six figures, someone who had built his life step by step from a struggling immigrant household, could suddenly be treated like a suspect. And that moment didn't feel real. It felt like someone else's life was being played in front of him. But reality doesn't pause for disbelief, and within hours, he was locked out of his bank, suspended from his company portal, and called into an internal investigation meeting that felt less like questioning and more like judgment. And that was the exact point where his life split into two timelines. The one he had built over 10 years of discipline, and the one he was about to survive without it. And before that moment, Ethan had grown up in a quiet working-class neighborhood in Ohio, where his father worked double shifts in a warehouse and his mother cleaned offices at night. And nothing in his childhood ever suggested comfort would come easily. But he had one thing: focus. The kind of silent obsession that makes people ignore everything except progress. And that focus carried him through community college, then a scholarship, then internships, then finally a stable tech job in a competitive fintech company in Chicago. And for the first time in his life, he believed stability was not a myth, until the morning everything collapsed. And when he was called into the investigation room, 3 executives sat across from him with screens showing transaction logs he had never seen before. And one of them said, "These transfers were authorized from your credentials." And Ethan responded instantly, "That's impossible. I didn't authorize anything." But the problem with systems is, they don't care about emotions. They only care about patterns. And the pattern looked guilty. And within 48 hours, he was placed on unpaid suspension pending legal review. And just like that, he was no longer an employee, no longer financially secure, and slowly becoming a name attached to suspicion. And the first shock wasn't fear, it was confusion, because he kept replaying every detail of his life, trying to find where it went wrong. And that mental loop became worse when his roommate asked him quietly, "So, what happens now?" And Ethan didn't have an answer, because for the first time in his life there was no plan, no backup, no structure holding him. And that night, he walked alone through downtown Chicago, watching people rush past him with purpose, while he felt completely erased from direction. And 2 days later, he received a second call, this time from an unknown number, and a voice said, "If you want to understand what happened, meet me at Lakeshore Park at 9 p.m. And against logic, against fear, he went, because when someone loses everything, curiosity becomes stronger than caution. And at the park, he met a woman named Maya Reyes, a cybersecurity auditor who used to work in internal fraud detection. And she told him something that changed the entire direction of his situation. She said, "Your credentials were used, but not by you. Someone cloned your access session." And Ethan immediately asked, "Then why am I being blamed?" And Maya replied, "Because it's easier to suspect an employee than to admit a system failure." And in that moment, he realized this was not just about him. It was about a company protecting itself. And the real crisis had already begun before he even knew it existed. And Maya offered him a choice: either disappear quietly and let the investigation destroy his reputation, or help her trace the real breach from the inside. But there was a risk, because if they were caught, he would be accused of manipulating evidence, and Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the lake water, reflecting city lights, thinking about his father's tired hands, his mother's sacrifices, the years he spent building a stable identity, and how easily it was erased. And finally he said, "If I already lost everything, then I have nothing left to protect." And that was the turning point where he stopped being a passive victim and became part of the investigation itself. And what followed was not a clean journey. It was nights of hidden log analysis, tracing encrypted sessions, following digital footprints across servers that kept changing shape like they were alive. And every discovery led deeper into something bigger than expected, because the fraud wasn't random. It was structured, coordinated, and tied to a third-party vendor that had access to multiple financial systems. And the more Ethan and Maya dug, the more dangerous it became, because someone inside the company was actively erasing traces in real time. And one night, while working from a shared, secured laptop in a quiet cafe, Ethan noticed something terrifying. His own credentials were being used again, live, while he was physically sitting there, and Maya immediately said, "They're framing you again, but this time they're watching." And for the first time, Ethan understood he wasn't just clearing his name. He was being hunted digitally by someone who could predict his every move. And pressure started building not just externally but internally. Because sleep disappeared, trust disappeared, and even normal conversations felt suspicious. And during one of those nights, Ethan finally broke down in silence and said, "I built my life believing systems were fair, but maybe they were just organized illusions." And Maya replied calmly, "No system is fair. It's only as honest as the people controlling it." And that truth changed his mindset completely, because he stopped trying to prove innocence and started trying to expose reality. And the deeper they went, the more they uncovered a hidden layer of financial manipulation, involving insider access tokens being sold on underground networks. And eventually, the trail pointed to a senior compliance officer within Ethan's own company, who had been quietly siphoning transactions for years, while using automated scripts to distribute blame across random employee profiles. And when Ethan finally confronted this truth, with proof gathered over weeks, everything escalated instantly. Because within hours, the company's security team attempted to seize all external evidence. And Maya told him, "Now you have two choices, run or finish this." And Ethan replied, "I already ran once when I lost everything. I'm not running again." And what followed was a controlled exposure strategy where they submitted encrypted evidence directly to federal cybercrime investigators, while simultaneously protecting themselves from corporate retaliation. And within days, the investigation flipped direction completely. The suspension was lifted. But more importantly, the real perpetrator was arrested for large-scale financial fraud and system manipulation. And when everything finally settled, Ethan stood again in front of the same office building where he had been accused. But this time, he was not the same person, because he realized something fundamental: that identity in the modern world is fragile. Systems can fail, truth can be delayed, and reputation can be rewritten in hours. But resilience is the only thing that cannot be automated or erased. And a week later, when he met Maya for the last time at the same lakeside park, she asked him, What did you learn from all this? And Ethan looked at the water, reflecting city lights, and said, I learned that losing everything is not the end. It's just the moment you stop living by borrowed stability and start living by real awareness. And Maya smiled slightly and said, most people never reach that point. And Ethan replied, most people never get broken enough to see clearly. And as he walked away that night alone, through the city that once rejected him, he understood the deepest truth of his entire journey. That survival is not about avoiding collapse. It is about who you become after it. Because life doesn't warn you before it breaks you. It only reveals you after the breaking is done. And in that realization, he finally understood that the strongest version of a person is never the one who never falls, but the one who learns to rebuild himself even when nothing guarantees he won't fall again.